Well, good morning to everyone and welcome to History Matters. And so does what I just spilled all over my coffee table. Oh no. Okay. I haven't done that before. History Matters and so okay. We are going to be talking as advertised about demagogues and tyrants. However, before we begin, I turn to my partner in crime, Annie, who is going to explain the rules of the game.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Annie Evans from New American History. Delighted as always to be with you here on a Friday morning. We are going to have about a half-hour discussion with Joanne. And during that time, if you have questions, we want you to put those in the Q&A. Continue to engage in the chat. We love the chat. But to get your questions answered, they've got to be in the Q&A. I'll come back in about 30 minutes and we will entertain your questions. See you in a bit.
Excellent. Okay. Oops, let me change my view here. Better. Okay. So, demagogues and tyrants. Obviously, what inspired me was this a little bit here. Okay. What inspired me was the CNN town hall, which we can talk about because I wasn't a town hall. But at any rate, certainly it raised interesting issues about how people are or how politicians traditionally engage with and appeal to the public. And it raised, for me, certainly thoughts about definitions, which is why I said town hall. We'll talk about that momentarily, but what happened there wasn't in the spirit of a town hall, which I will get to eventually. But what I wanted to talk about was, what is a demagogue? What is a tyrant? And I'll throw in the mix here, what is a fascist? So this is partly definitions that we're talking about here today, particularly given that these words, especially tyrant and fascist, we've talked about this before on History Matters, that they get thrown all over the place, words with no meanings. And very often when I begin one of our episodes, that's where I go, right? Let's define terms before we begin. So let's define terms before we begin. Demagogue, and I will say in advance, so I have, this morning as I was thinking about what I wanted to say, what I thought was, I think I've talked about demagogues a lot on Twitter. So I searched on my Twitter handle and the word demagogue. There are a lot of tweets. And part of the reason for that is because years ago, I sent out into the world a tweet that featured a Hamilton comment about demagoguery, and people saw that quote. I think at one point on Twitter, I called it the quote that wouldn't die, because people kept seeing it and then just taking it and reprinting it and sending it out. And it led people to say, he was a prophet. He knew what was coming. And I had to keep beaming in and saying, no, actually, he was looking back to the past at history and talking about one of the major vulnerabilities, one of the major fault lines of any kind of democratic government. But demagogue I've talked about a lot. And the reason why I have is because the founding generation talked about it a lot for the precise reason that I just sketched when referring to Hamilton. The assumption was, so there they are in a world of monarchies, and they're creating, and I mentioned it this way before, they called it an experiment in government. It's not going to be a monarchy. It's going to be more grounded on the masses, more popular in that sense of the word. It will be more democratic in the sense that the demos, or public opinion, will be more central to this kind of government, which sounds excellent. But what the founding generation well knew is that that kind of government, in a way that is not true of monarchies, is very susceptible to demagogues. Because what is a demagogue? A demagogue is a political leader who, rather than offering rational argument or talking about things that are grounded in concrete reality in a way that relates very specifically to politics, demagogues appeal to emotions, desires, and prejudices. So what they do to get power is they rile up the public. They pander to emotions, and we're going to come back to that, talk about that, I know, a lot on History Matters. But there's a good reason for that. And in the case of demagogues, a very good reason, because that's often what demagogues do, is that they get people's emotions riled up and get people to buy into whatever it is that they're offering that way. And then once they get in power, they do whatever the heck they want to do. And that's how republics fall. So for the founding generation, demagogue, and this is a significant point, we throw around words so much these days. You know, you're fill in the blank with very, very little meaning. In the case of demagogue, I think often we do that too. Like, oh, he's just a demagogue. But for the people creating the Constitution and the framers of the Constitution, it had a very specific meaning. It wasn't just a sort of rhetorical insult. It was a particular kind of threat to a republic. It was very much grounded in reality. And when they said they were afraid of demagogues, that was a grounded fear. So it's important to know we may use it as kind of an epithet that we throw out into the world, but it represented and still should represent a very readily acknowledged and recognized threat to a government that's grounded on any kind of democratic premise. A tyrant, alternately, is an absolute ruler who's unrestrained by law or a constitution, who in one way or another exercises absolute power, either oppressively or brutally or both. And these are all of these definitions are coming from dictionaries. So it's not Joanne inventing. Joanne is inventing along with much help from other people who do defining for their living. So we have a demagogue as a political leader who seeks support by appealing to the emotions, desires, and prejudices of ordinary people, pander to the public to get power. Tyrant, an absolute ruler, unrestrained by law or constitution, someone who usurps sovereignty, who exercises absolute power oppressively or brutally. And then finally, fascist is someone who believes in a way of organizing society in which a government is ruled by a dictator who controls the lives of the people. The people are not allowed to disagree with the government. Fascism generally is a political, and this is very dictionary-esque, a political philosophy, movement, or regime, thank you, dictionary, that exalts nation and race above the individual, and that stands for a centralized autocratic government headed by a dictatorial leader, severe economic and social regimentation, and forcible suppression of opposition. Okay. Demagogue, tyrant, and a more modern world, fascist. Now, Hamilton, because it's Hamilton, how could I not include a Hamilton quote? He has a lot to say about demagogues specifically, which makes sense. He was very nervous about small d democracy, democratic government. He thought that he was someone who appreciated the stability of monarchies and was trying, in one way or another, was going to push the United States as close as he could to something monarchical, which he got attacked for constantly. But one of the major things that he distrusted about any kind of democratic government was this threat of the demagogue. So he writes about it all the time. I think, can't remember now, but I think an interesting experiment. The entire record of the Constitutional Convention is online. One place you can get it is A Century of Lawmaking, which is the name of a website that is offered to you by the Library of Congress, and you'll see there that they have the record of the convention, and I believe there you can search for words. I think it's word searchable, and just try searching on the word demagogue. I think it might be one of the most frequently used sort of political words because that's what people were afraid of. And Hamilton, throughout the Federalist essays, as well as at the convention, talked about it. So here is what Hamilton said in Federalist number 1, which is one of my favorites, and not because it's number 1. He said, "History will teach us that of those men who have overturned the liberties of republics, the greatest number have begun their career by paying an obsequious court to the people, commencing demagogues and ending tyrants." So there you have it, right? That history teaches that what you have is people who pander to the public, get power that way, and end doing with that power whatever the heck they want to do with it, in one way or another, creating absolute rule. That, to Hamilton, it's in the first Federalist essay, and that to him represents an overall pattern, and he's not the only one who believes that. And as I've said before, that early founding generation had a really specific way, Enlightenment-esque way of thinking about history and its impact on the present. They, in a sort of Enlightenment point of view, saw all of the past as one big bucket of history that they could pull from and detect patterns, right? They would become enlightened with patterns of history. And then ideally, they could see those patterns and then help mold the present by using these patterns proven in the past. So that's part of what this whole generation is doing. It's certainly part of what they're thinking about when they're creating the Constitution and when they're thinking about the beginning of the American government. So let me move on here to where I was going. I just got lost on my notes. Okay. So on the, sorry guys. So here's what I will say before I commence here. No coffee this morning at all. And you always know that that's a bad place for me to begin any episode. But here's an important point I wanted to make about tyrants and fascists versus demagogues. So demagogues, when they're appealing to the public, they are, in one way or another, they may be presenting themselves as the I am the person with all the answers, me, but they're not explicitly defining themselves in opposition to democracy. They're trying in one way or another to absorb people's assumptions about democracy, or not highlight the ways in which they're obviously undemocratic. But tyrants and fascists explicitly put themselves in contest with democracy and democratic institutions. And I think that's an important difference to highlight here, because I think obviously tyrant and fascist feel like much more threatening words, threatening ideas. But when you look throughout American history, what you tend to see is people who we, in one way or another, have labeled demagogues. Demagogues don't feel as threatening. Hamilton highlights the threat, which is they begin as demagogues, and once they have power, they do frightening things with it. And that's one thing I want folks to come away with from our conversation this morning, as ever, is to think about the words that we're using, how we're using them, and what they are really saying to us. To point to someone like Donald Trump and say he's a demagogue feel like an epithet, just a simple epithet. Oh, he's a demagogue, right? He's just pandering to the masses. But that word has a specific meaning, and the meaning is partly bound up with the outcome, right? Demagogues aren't just about appealing to the public. They're appealing to the public to get power. It's about the outcome. It's about the end result. What they want is power. And the demagoguery, which may feel entertaining, shall we say, or non-threatening in some way or another, and you watch it and it appears on TV and people laugh in audiences at it. Demagoguery can feel like entertainment. Demagoguery is not about the entertainment. Demagoguery is about using that to get power and then not to let it go. And that's one of the threats confronting us. Someone said, I saw someone say in the chat before we began, that they cheered on, I'm still tweeting, although I'm really like backing towards the exit, but still, cheered on a tweet that I made because I was angry at a CNN newscaster saying that, you can't live in a silo. Like, we did the good thing by broadcasting that town hall that we did with former President Trump. It was good. You can't live in a silo, and you can't turn your back on things you don't like and expect them to go away. And my response to that was no. And I don't expect, don't turn your back on and ignore things. But it's one thing to say that. It's another thing to have a staged, audience-controlled, really rally, rather than an honest-to-goodness town hall, and then sort of offer that to the public, featuring someone who is knowingly deploying demagoguery to get power, right? A town hall, a real town hall, could have been fine. Could have been fine. What a town hall, town hall and town meeting are related to each other. Town meeting, if you think about New England, it's colonial and early American New England, where town meetings were at the center really of the government of the local, and town meeting meaning the town would get together and decide on something. It was the demos, it was the group, it was the we the people getting together and debating and coming up with decisions. A town hall, like a real town hall, is a bunch of people brought together and they get to engage with the candidates, ideally it's more than one, and ask questions. And there's some spontaneity there. And it's a real engagement of a group and a person or people who are running to be leaders. The spirit of a town hall is some degree of spontaneity and the fact that it's a group of people engaging with, debating with, asking questions of the person on the stage. That's not what happened on TV this week. It was not a town hall, and I wish people would stop calling it that. And it wasn't quite an interview either. I don't know, you can come up with the noun that you would like to use. It wasn't a town hall. And, in my casting about online this morning, trying to decide what I wanted to say about these topics, there was one point that was repeated several times over, which is worth noting along these lines, that Democratic, small d, Democratic candidates for government understand the need for that engagement and spontaneity, but there are individuals, more than one individual potentially, and they're debating and they're engaging in argument. And in doing so, they are endorsing and acting out the democratic impulse, right? Where people can debate, they have an equal right to say what they want to say. They can argue with each other. The public can weigh in. In a democratic form of government, there are all kinds of opposing ideas. You might not like some of them. I certainly don't. But those ideas can contest each other in open and honest, fair elections. And another format, a free, fair, open debate. If you have more of a, let's say, authoritarian mindset, debates are not going to make you happy. Debates put people equal on a stage, whether it's you and the person interviewing you and asking questions, or whether it's two people debating each other. People who follow someone with an authoritarian impulse put that person above all other people. And so by definition, that kind of leader, if that's what people are seeing in and appreciating in that kind of leader, that doesn't work really well in a debate format, because it says, no, actually the person who you think is better than all others and on a different level and knows things no one else knows, and I alone can fix everything. That's often an authoritarian mindset. That doesn't work in a debate. A debate, it might be unpleasant, it might be nasty. There are any number of ways in which a debate can go wrong, but debates in one way or another have some component of democracy involved with them. And authoritarian mindsets, people with authoritarian mindsets, that's not going to work for them. It's because it's violating one of the main things that they have that they're using to appeal to their audience, right? Heaven forbid there's spontaneity, right? There's questions that aren't controlled and something is exposed in some way that shouldn't be exposed if that person is going to get and keep power. So again, worth bearing in mind, things that we've seen in the recent and semi-recent past, like the fact that debates themselves, and are we having them, and who is in them, and are they good or should they not be held, and that in some formats, some Republicans have said no more debates, right? We don't want to take part in debates, and perhaps arguing like, oh, well, they're, controlled or staged, or what they're afraid of is the opposite of that, which is spontaneity, and who knows what will be exposed or revealed. And that's the risk for anyone of any party taking part in a town hall or taking part in a debate. But, if you are if what you're doing in politics is grounded on appealing to the public and presenting a certain image, that presents you as being above all others in ways that aren't necessarily democratic, debates aren't going to be super wonderful. And thus, this week, we ended up with whatever you want to call it, a pseudo interview with an audience that was selected because they basically approve of the person who is being pseudo interviewed, and who was allowed to say a lot of things that are supremely not true, and they just said them. Obviously, this made me angry this week, and it made me angry in part because people afterwards, particularly some people affiliated with that network, said, America was served. No, America could have been served if instead of what we got, we had someone honestly asking questions of former President Trump and then following up on answers that he gave that were obviously wrong. No, people on the left are not aborting 9-month-old babies. I mean, come on, right? There wasn't the degree of pushback, and Trump did what he does very well, which is dominate that conversation, override. And so the end result did not serve America well. So I'm not saying, speaking of demagogues, that, if someone has a sort of demagogue's impulse that they should be entirely cut off from appealing to the public and public access. I'm not saying that. And I think blasting people into the sidelines because you think that they are wannabe demagogues or tyrants, in a sense, that's an anti-democratic impulse too. Let them say what they want in an equal and fair setting where others are saying what they want and ideas are competing, right? I'm willing to say, if he's running for president, then he is going to have a right to engage with the public, but it becomes supremely important how that engagement is structured and framed and described and mediated. It doesn't mean that it has to be, fit into a little tiny context, but demagoguery is about wannabe tyrant and audience. And what we have now, and not just with one network, right, is, and we saw it before, we have various forms of media who realize the ratings and the draw and the attention that they can get and covering certain kinds of things in certain kinds of ways, and they do it. They do it. They get the ratings, they get attention. If you're saying America was served well by what happened this week, maybe you could say your network was served well among some people. I don't know, but I'm not sure how America was served well by that format of what happened this week. It wasn't. As ever, I mention this topic, I bring up this topic and I discuss it this week because I want you to be aware of the ploys and the postures and the traps that are set, and that, as I've said many a time, we walk into with our emotional responses, right? And then we're right in the middle of it. We're angry or we're happy, whatever it is we are, we just got sucked right in. We fell right into that trap. Be aware of what's going on. Be aware not only of who's talking to you, but how they're talking to you. And how is the engagement formatted? How is it set up? Who is allowed to speak? Who isn't allowed to speak? What are you actually seeing? What is the nature of the performance? Because that is what it is. If a politician is appealing to the public in one way or another, that's a performance. Look at the performance. Figure out how it's framed and what it can and can't do, and think about what that might do to what you're seeing, right? Think about the path that's being laid out for you as you walk into any kind of debate or anything else. How is this being set up, and what does that suggest to you? Think before you react. In some cases, because for some people, what they mostly want is the reaction. And whether that means the reaction of people who will get overjoyed and support them, or the reaction of people who will hate them and get all riled up, and then people can say, ha, we got them. This morning, I made the mistake of going on Twitter and looking at the responses to what I said yesterday about, whatever happened there is not about silos. And there were several people who said, cry more. And it was just like, okay, number one, I'm not crying, but number two, that's kind of all you got. It's like, that's what the game for many people is: make them upset, get them upset. Yeah, tears. What we want is like liberal tears. Like, yeah, I'm not crying, but thanks for offering the really strong zinger there. At any rate, the main purpose of this is just, once again, in these times when our patterns of media, our patterns of engagement with the news, the ways in which those patterns are changing, certain kinds of publications are closing, others are opening. In the realm of communication, this entire era is in a state of flux. So thinking historian brain, thinking ahead 50 years and looking back at this moment, communication, social media, different forms of media, opening, closing, local newspapers, all of this stuff, obviously in one way or another, and certainly joined together, has an extreme impact on a democratic politics. And we're in the middle of that moment right now. And we don't have our heads up out of the morass yet to absolutely know how it's working out and what we can do about it, right? We'll be able to look back in the future and say, if only they had whatever. So that is what I'm sort of pleading with you to do. Step back for a moment and think about what you are being presented. What is the entertainment, in the case of a TV show, that you are being presented with? The goal of it might be information. The goal of it, ideally, is an informed populace. Whatever the goal is being framed as, always think about what it seems the people doing the framing are asking for or want. How are they setting things up in a way that either does seem to agree with that desire or actually supremely doesn't? Getting an audience that all likes the person up on the stage is a pretty strong idea of what gives you a pretty strong idea of what's going to happen, what the outcome is going to be, and tells you a lot about what the people organizing it want, right? Which is why it was not a town hall in any sense, not in that kind of a setting. So be smart political consumers, and don't get sucked in by the demagoguery. Realize the trajectory that Hamilton sets out is that demagogues start out demagogues, and then they find their way into being tyrants, and perhaps even a particular kind of tyrant, right? A fascist. Be aware of the pattern, and then think about what you are seeing, what you are taking it in, your reaction to it, and what the desired reaction by the people offering it to you seems to be. It's so important to be kind of a self-aware consumer of politics right now. It always is, right? It always is. Politics is, in one way or another, in good ways and bad ways, about persuasion. You always need to be thinking about who's doing the persuading and what are they trying to persuade you of. But particularly in this moment when, among other things, partly because of technology, partly because of the particular habits of certain candidates, we're having a sort of truthiness moment where it's unclear what actual fact is, and that's not going to get better in the near future. It's going to get worse. It becomes really, really important to be a savvy consumer of information, of news, of politics. Okay, I'm a couple minutes over. I will stop. So you're going to have to follow me on the mug this week. Thank you, Carolee. I forgot to look down, and I always actually look for the mug, and then I know that my Friday is complete because people are chanting for the mug. This mug made perfect sense to me, and I'll have to explain it to you. But this whole mentality that I set out for you about like thinking about what people want of you, and also in the case of a historian, standing way back and being like, so what does this tell us about the current moment, and how does this relate to the past, et cetera, et cetera. I would say very often in our current political moment, my brain is operating on multiple levels. So there's citizen brain, which is not sleeping at night, and there's historian brain, which is extremely interested, and then there's webcast brain, which is trying to think about the best way to talk about things. So it's like fear, interest, anxiety, teacher mode. Anyway, it's part of the reason why this has not been the most effective writing moment in my career, because I'm so torn between all of these ways of engaging with things, and thus It's the many brains.
I think that's a Carolee production, if I'm not
I
mistaken.
think this is a Carolee production. And
Yep.
it just, I was digging around. I dug around in the mugs from the NCHE conference. I dug around in other places where now I have mugs everywhere. And this was the mug that made me,
That's perfect.
yeah. So
Absolutely perfect.
it does have contingency and newbie right at the
Mhm.
center.
Right in the middle.
Yeah, it's an
And they're
excellent,
at the center of everything.
yes. And so I thank Carolee for this. Actually, in jingles, there's Jingle Brain, there's Fresca Brain. I greatly appreciate this because it has pondering brain, quote brain, founder brain, popular culture brain. I like all of these brains and they're all in there.
I love all those brains.
So anyway, that's the mug choice. Let me
Joanne, we have some new friends. I mentioned my friend Connie, but then after you started talking, my friend from Kentucky, Kim is an incredible educator as well. She runs, she has a newsletter called The Holler, and I just love reading it.
Oh,
She's from the part of Kentucky where my daddy was from. So she and I have grown to be really good friends. So she's here today. Connie's here today. Is there anyone else new?
I know I forgot to say that at the beginning.
Yep.
I should have said at the beginning, if you're new, tell us that you're new because
Yep.
the History Matters community will give you a massive welcome.
And every week we do a mug reveal. Joanne picks a mug from her vast collection, which we have all helped add to. And it kind of like sums up the talk. So we've got some great questions if you're ready to dig in. The first one comes from our good friend Lois McMillan, who was with us at NCHE in Utah this past spring. Lois says she had watched a previous Yale course from Donald Kagan, giving the history behind what is a tyrant. And she said that she asked, were the founders aware of the historical definition, the way Kagan describes in ancient Greece? So were they aware of a tyrant even back then, I think is what she's asking.
Well, my short answer is yes, but I want to know, can the person who's asking the question give me some vague sense of what definition they're thinking about?
Okay, so Lois, if you'll put that in the chat, that would be great. Lois
But one of the first things I did when I early on decided I was going to go to graduate school, and I'd always been interested in the founding generation, but now I was going to study. I bought all of these books on ancient history, which I'd always been interested in anyway. But that was like, you know, they knew that inside and out because that was their standard of measurement in politics and in society in a variety of different ways. So the question is, they certainly had a lot of ideas about what had happened in ancient Greece and Rome. The question is their version of understanding it versus the ancient way of understanding it. And that I don't know what Professor Kagan said. And I'm looking.
All right, I don't see anything from Lois yet.
Okay. My without knowing response to that.
I haven't seen the Kagan lecture.
Yeah, no, I haven't either, although I know it's among the many history lectures that courses that Yale Film put online. I would say that, yeah, because they were, you know, when you read Polybius or some of these early sources, you can explicitly see the founders reading these things, drawing patterns out of them and applying them to the present. There's a notebook. Hamilton read Plutarch's lives of the ancient great Greeks and Romans and took notes. And his notes are available, right? They ended up being saved over time. And one of the papers that I wrote as a grad student was, I got the edition of Plutarch that Hamilton was reading, and I got his notes and I read it with him, right? Like I would go through the pages and see what he thought was interesting and see what he thought wasn't interesting. And in part, he was doing this in a really usage-based way, right? He was like, well, that's interesting. When you have more than one king, that's bad, like this happens. Whereas in this case, so he was trying to sort of use Plutarch as a way of getting case studies of how things worked in the past so that he could know that, think about that for the purposes of the present. I will add that, see if I can get this straight. He generally took notes on 3 kinds of things in his notes when you look at them overall. He was very interested in monarchs, kings, single rulers and what happened. He was very interested in military strategy, which is not surprising given he loved the glory and prestige and power in a way of that. and then anything that had to do with sex. So that's, I always felt like that was kind of a good little, the Hamilton brain, right? Like politics and monarchy and military and sex. That's what he
We
found.
got a Hamilton brain mug.
Yeah,
Carly, do we have a way to take the one that you made for Joanne and wrap it as a Hamilton brain mug? Okay, let's go on to the next question. If Lois comes back to that one, we can circle back to the Kagan question. All right, this one comes from our friend Dale in Williamsburg. He says, surely there were gentlemen in the founding period who might have been considered demagogues. Does anyone come to mind?
Well, I mean, some people worried about Aaron Burr, who didn't seem to have any set political views and appeared to sort of be an opportunist and was, in any moment doing what that moment seemed to require. Some people accused Jefferson of being that because he, again, seemed like someone who was very focused on appealing to the people. But again, by their standard, demagogue meaning spending a lot of time appealing to the people. In and of itself, that was sort of like, whoa, that's something really different from what we've seen before. There's in, I think, 1800, maybe, there's a moment in New York when there were different voting wards in New York City, and apparently Hamilton and Burr were traveling ward to ward and speaking to the gathered crowds. And I haven't looked at it in many, many, many years, but I remember finding a newspaper article and it was like, gasp, they're talking to the public, like directly to the, wow, so that was kind of cosmic. So again, I guess the standards of the period matter too, but the Federalists, generally speaking, would have pointed to a variety of different Jeffersonian Republicans and said, they're nothing but demagogues. Hamilton, I guess, in the case of Jefferson, did think that he had the potential to be a demagogue, but that he, as Hamilton put it, was so concerned about what people might think about him that he wouldn't do something too horrible because it might make people think poorly of him. So the only way he could get to say that Jefferson wasn't a horrible, dangerous demagogue is, oh no, he's too worried about people not liking him to be a really bad demagogue. It's like, thanks, Hamilton.
Wow.
Praise.
All right, this one comes from our good buddy, Richie Houston, up there in New England. He asked, how much of the current threat from demagogues is rooted in corporate media, concentration of wealth, lax campaign finance regulations, repeal of fairness doctrine, and Citizens United ruling? Ooh, that's a loaded question.
It's a loaded question. And the fact of the matter is, any of those rules or violation or dropping of or changing of rules can have a huge impact. The trickiness of this is all of the changes that are surrounding those things, right? So sometimes there's such a fundamental change in whether it's the nature of technology or something else that the rules have to change, and then you don't really know the outcome until it's happening. In some cases, yeah, like, why are Republicans or some Republicans nowadays less interested in having debates? Interesting question. There's nothing that would make that happen. So I guess my short answer to that is all of those things can have a huge impact. The question is, you have to consider in evaluating the impact, the intent of the change. And in part, that's based on just fundamental changes in technology and politics happening around those longstanding norms and rules. So, it's, you might say, well, not in the case of Citizens United, but in some other cases, well, they changed this and it was bad. There might not be a, sort of power hungry villain reason for changing it. It might be that there's some technological innovation that has now made this more complicated. But all of those things are important to consider. That's the precise kind of thinking that I'm encouraging for thinking about everything that we're seeing today, which is, it's defined in some ways by the possibilities and limitations of our present, but those shift over time. And that means that there's change happening constantly, contingency. And we can't always predict until we're smack in the middle of it what the impact of some of those changes will be.
All right, this one comes from our friend Margareta, who I believe comes to us from Italy, I believe. She asked, is the definition of demagogue also related with the intent? Can a person be a demagogue without being aware of what they are doing?
Oh, I think in the way in which it is being used in political contexts, and the way the founders are thinking about it and who they're pointing to in ancient history, I think intent matters. I think it's one thing to say that person's good at speaking to the public and engaging them. And in early America, that kind of person would have been scary and threatening. But what's more scary and more threatening is someone, and which is why, Hamilton or people might have pointed to Burr and said, well, he's like saying whatever he needs to say to get power, but what he wants is power. That's the goal. So they aren't, I don't think anyone who is skilled at engaging with the public necessarily is a demagogue, but I think, and actually I see Clinton says populist versus demagogue. That's true, those are two separate words, but still, there's a really interesting book called Declaring Independence by Jay Fliegelman. I think it's F-L-I-E.
Someone will put the link in the chat for us, I hope.
And that was a book that shaped my understanding of some of the things I'm talking about now, like the culture of self-presentation. And it's about like literally the process of declaring independence, meaning the performance of it. And it talks about how you were supposed to seem, when you spoke to the public, very authentic. And so you were working really hard at crafting a really inauthentic way of looking authentic. And it gets at this very thing, right? That what you're expected to seem a certain way for the public and to look that way, in this case, seeming like sincere and authentic, you had to practice it and you had to craft a mask and you had to sort of set yourself up to offer the right authentic face to the public. It explains how all of that is happening in this period. And so in a way, the ways in which people are figuring out what comes from different ways of appealing to the public are really emphasized in this book in a really interesting way related to everything that we're talking about here. One of the interesting points that book, and it's a quirky book, I will say, it for a whole bunch of reasons. I used to assign it a lot in classes. It's just newer stuff that I assign now. But I always would say to my students, they either love it or they want to throw it against a wall because it's quirky. It's a weird book. But one of the interesting ideas in it is that one of the original copies of the Declaration of Independence appeared to have diacritical marks, meaning marks about how it should be read aloud. And the point of the book is it was assumed the Declaration would be read aloud. It was read aloud everywhere. So the Declaration was not just a piece of paper. It was something that was intended to be performed in a certain way, read all over the place out loud. And that gets at this idea about performing politics and in the founding era, what that meant.
All right. Sydney asks, how exactly do demagogues appeal to people?
I suppose a variety of ways. One really obvious way, I suppose, would be saying exactly what they want to hear. Like you people are, we live in a time when your freedom is being taken away, define freedom. I will bring it back for you, offering what appear to be the desires of people without really defining necessarily how you're going to do it or what you're talking about, but also fear and threats, right? Oh my gosh, we're going down in flames. I can solve the problem. Getting people riled up to the point that they're not thinking clearly about what's being said and what's being suggested and how they're responding to it. If you can suck people's emotions into what you're saying, you could do that. That's a power. That's a real power. And it rides over it. It surpasses all of those handy, rational, logical modes in which we are supposed to engage with politics, gets right past them. And that's, one of the things I've been writing about very slowly is grounded on this idea, which is that it's not necessarily demagoguery, but if you're bullying or threatening or getting people claiming to be a victim there's another way, actually. You can say we're all victims, and then people get all like, yeah, they're out to get us. And if you can suck people into that mindset, then they're going to be ready to fight for what they think is fair and theirs, even though if you back up, they're probably not victims at all, but that'll get people's emotions going, and they won't be thinking really hard about the actual logic behind what's going on. So it's like appealing to fears, desires, like really basic emotions, sort of visceral emotions that get you going and acting without necessarily thinking about what exactly you're doing.
All right, Melissa Elliott asks, did the founders think of demagogues or oligarchs as sometimes being the same people or as teaming up?
Demagogues and oligarchs. That's a good question. I mean, I guess I would say generally, they were looking for different ways in which people were grabbing at power. So I suppose you could say demagoguery could lead to an oligarchic government. Think of, this is kind of off the topic, but the fact that we're having this discussion and we're talking about oligarchs and demagogues, and like 15 years ago, how many of us were thinking about, or 20 years ago, oligarchs? Like, is this a gerontocracy or an oligarchy? It's like we are in such a politically conscious moment that we have discussions now that I don't think at any other point in my life we would have had. But
world history teachers actually talk about that every year. It's in their curriculum.
Really?
To explain the difference. Oh yeah, it's you explain the difference between a monarchy and a oligarchy. Oh yeah, that's all part of it. Typically in a world history course. So I think this episode will be useful. I can see world history teachers downloading this transcript when John posts it. So this will be really helpful. All right, we have a question from Dave. Dave says, it seems to me those who want to undermine democracy are very effective using the rules and norms of the system to accomplish their means. Gerrymandering, packing the courts, passing voter ID laws to suppress the vote of those likely to vote. How did the founders view this problem versus how the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments address the problem?
it's a long question, so you're going to have to repeat that for me. So I make sure I got it all.
He's asking how, things that we're seeing now, like voter suppression laws, packing the courts, how that compares to the founders versus the era when the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment were passed.
Well, gerrymandering dates back to the founding. It's actually Elbridge Gerry. He's not Elbridge Gerry, but that's a practice that came about because of a gerrymandered district that kind of looked like a gerrymander, and they were like, it's gerrymandering. So these practices, in one way or another, are long-standing practices. The amendments are a great example of times changing and possibilities changing and opportunities changing, and limitations maybe changing or decreasing, so that you can have, because of national events, world events, local events, you can have that kind of change. But as with everything about the Constitution, as much as originalists want to say it's one thing and it's always been one thing and it's ever one thing and it never changes, and you can go right back to the founding and assume it's always the same. I mean, it's simple to the point of being silly to say, yeah, but they never assumed that, thus the amendment process. But the founders didn't assume that what they did very specifically was going to be it in cement forever. They weren't even absolutely sure it was going to last 10 years. So, they certainly understood change. And I think they also, and we have seen ways in which you can have an amendment and then the amendment gets sort of outdated, or you need a new amendment. The interesting thing to me always about the thinking about the Constitution and the amendments, the Bill of Rights in the early American period is, on the one hand, they were trying to create something very much born of the sense of rights and threats of government and of the masses at the moment. They wanted it to be a special kind of document that people would understand is not just a normal law, but that stands above. It's a constitution is a special thing and has some authority to it and weight to it that other kinds of things don't. But in doing that, they did not pretend to be creating this big thing that would never change. They didn't even know if it would work, right? So the degree to which they were like, a constitution is a special thing, and yet it also has to be engaged with and responsive to the evolution of a government and of a people and of a country and of a society. To me, that's always been really interesting, because they think, this is what I've said a lot of different times about the founding generally, that generation thinks about the creation of things in the most weirdly, wonderfully self-conscious way that there's no reason we do anymore, and I've talked about it when they're trying to create a culture, an American culture of politics, and they'll be like, how do we dress as small R Republican politicians? Like, what does an American politician look like? I don't know. Do you know? I don't know. Very basic decisions that could have very major impacts in a lot of different levels. And it's that self-conscious grappling with the very profound long-term meanings and impacts of things that they're deciding in the moment. That's part of it. It's improv plus high stakes. That's part of what's always really interesting to me about this period generally.
And I think when you said, what does a politician look like, or what does a candidate look like, it made me think of, an earlier comment someone put in the chat, the people currently in power are very threatened by this younger generation of politicians, Beto O'Rourke canvassing in jeans, what we saw happening in Tennessee, the Justins really scared the bejesus out of those people in Tennessee. And so the only thing they could think of to do was to dismiss them, because they didn't, the faces in our state houses are changing to reflect the way American, and if you look at the last census results, we're at the first time white is a minority, right? More than half the population is no longer white dominant, and that is scaring them a lot.
Oh, sure. You are seeing people who assume that they have most, if not all, power, always have, always will, white men. And because they assume they have all the power all the time, always have, always will, anyone who gets more rights or more power feels to them like a supreme threat. And so in that sense, if you believe you should have all the power all the time, democracy itself becomes your enemy, because it's not going to let you have that. Free and fair elections become your enemy. And so what we're seeing now is this kind of knee-jerk grabbing at power by people who absolutely believe that they are the one and only group of people who should have it. And they're responding to people who are just getting more rights and power than they had before in an equitable way. And thus they're creating constantly like, no, it's not just this, they're asking for this. It's like, no, they're actually, they're you have to blow up and exaggerate what these, to the people who think they should always have all power all the time. What's happening, it complies in some ways with demographics. It's logical. It's not extreme. For you to justify your extreme reaction, you have to create extreme things happening on the other side. And that brings us to our wonderful moment of what is real and what isn't, and what can we prove and what can't we. And, all of the talk that AI has been getting, I haven't even delved into that yet, but that just is like a little tiny banner that's like, this is going to get worse. It's going to get much worse.
Yeah, I've been playing with the AI a little. All right. Susan asks, it seems an error in logic to assume Trump could participate in a town hall in the first place, but words and labels are important. So what name could we call things like the CNN broadcast that just took place next time? As in, CNN didn't hold a town hall, they held a blank.
You could say interview, you could say a conversation with, you could say any number of things. It was not a town hall. It was certainly not a debate. Conversation with and interview suggests structure in some way, not spontaneous. And it wasn't in that sense, as I understand it, some of you might be able to correct me. CNN went to Trump and suggested this, and then set it up in a way that he was comfortable with. And if that's the case, which maybe it isn't, but that's an infomercial I see someone recommended. If that is the case, which is certainly what I've seen, then it's actually a lie to call it a town hall. It was a staged something. And again, maybe a conversation with, it's still a little open for my taste, but it's more honest than town hall. Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know the perfect word, but there would be words that are way better than town hall, and it's so striking that in this moment, when in so many ways people don't really fully, some people really fully don't either understand what democracy is or care what democracy is, then you take this democratic structure, town hall, and then just assign it to something like it doesn't have any meaning. Town hall, it's yet another way in which democracy is being tossed all over the place and people aren't thinking about the real meanings of things when it comes to democracy.
Someone suggested cult meeting with the moderator.
I don't know what I would call it. It because of the way it played out, it felt a little bit like a rally because of the audience sort of cheering, the selective audience like cheering on. I don't know.
Another person suggested that CNN's in-kind campaign donation would be a good.
Many people are saying that on Twitter. I think that's an interesting thought to consider, but I think this line of questioning that people are having now, what should we call it? I applaud this line of questioning because that's exactly what we should be doing. And if someone came up with the perfect term or a good term and said, that wasn't a town hall, it was a whatever, it would be getting people to think about exactly what it was that they saw.
I just had to tell Clinton, because I don't have time to type it, I love you. He referenced the "They Took Our Jobs" episode of South Park.
I saw that, but I don't know that. I know some.
So he's giving you the YouTube link so you can watch it over
okay. I will.
Charles Catalano asks, in what ways do you see a connection between the success of Demagogues and Tyrants and the education or lack thereof of the populace?
Well, I would say in a general way, people not understanding what democracy is a big problem, right? I mean, on the most fundamental level, if you don't understand what the government is, how it works, what your rights are, how the opportunities that democracies allow for, the change that democracies can encompass. I've said before, democracy isn't an endpoint, it's a process, and we can work towards making it better, and it could sometimes get worse, but we could push towards making it better. If you don't really fundamentally know what it is or what your rights are in it, in a way that goes beyond, I have a right to have a gun, but like I have a right to civil protest, I have a right to free speech, but I'm responsible for what I say with my free speech. There are, I know I've mentioned this before, but it kind of haunts me. When I woke up and threw out on Twitter the statement that I don't think Americans understand what they lose when they lose democracy, and a bunch of people said, who the heck needs democracy? We can try something else, right? So like, and then other people said, we've never had democracy to begin with, so who cares? That just drove my point home. Americans don't understand what it is. It's not an absolute, it's not a done deal, but it matters. And it matters in ways that the people who say, who cares, let's try something different, just on the most fundamental level aren't thinking about. The idea that some people are told, you're not allowed to have that view or else we're going to threaten you with violence, might make some people happy if they're on the side doing the threatening. But yeah, you have to consider the fact that down the road, you might be the person with a point of view that is unliked, and you will then be the person being threatened. That form of government, that form of governing is very clearly not democracy. That's brute force. But people, that's part of why I do what I do all over the place, is because I really think people don't understand what democracy is. And what it gives you and what it needs to run on. So I scream about accountability all the time. In democratic modes of government, we give power to people and they're accountable to us for the way that they use that power. Public servants are accountable for what they do. And when they can assume there's no accountability and they can do whatever they want because they think they'll never be held responsible for it, that's moving us away from democracy. There are all kinds of conversations we'll need to have about the Supreme Court at some point. But all of these things, we're at a moment where there's some really big assumptions and questions being debated. I see that we've moved past our mark, but yeah.
We're over our time, but we had some more good questions. I'm going to squeeze this one in because Gloria actually posed two. One, she's talking about New York State wanting to eliminate social studies as a core subject. I find that so hard to believe because I was just up in New York City 2 months ago working with their teachers, and they just released a series of free comic books all about history. So that shocks me if that's really what they're trying to do. But she's asking, would eliminating social studies as a core subject be a danger to democracy? And she also asks, how do you distinguish between calling someone demagogue and name calling as an actual danger? It seems like being a politician nowadays means appealing to someone's emotions. So,
well, right, it has to do with intent, which is what we talked about a little while back. I don't know about New York, and so that I actually can't.
That I need to look up, Gloria. That's terrible if that's true, but I know the person who's responsible for social studies curriculum in New York City, and he hasn't mentioned that to me, so I need to check in with him this week.
Cece's comment down there is good. Authoritarianism is so much easier than having to think and read and participate in democracy. It is. But what was the other part of Gloria's question?
The other part was, how much is this playing into emotion, and what's the difference between name calling and just calling someone demagogue and a real demagogue?
Right. Well, right. And that's kind of why at some point in what I was commenting on today, demagogue, is not just a word you throw out, although we use it often that way. And, I don't have an easy answer to that, because when I tossed off this quote, again, you'll find it in a nanosecond if you just look, go to Twitter and look for my handle and the word demagogue and maybe the word Hamilton, it'll come up. I threw this quote out that was like, if I wanted to see someone who's dangerous to the Republic, here's how I describe him. And it's like, he's describing a demagogue, but people took that as Hamilton's like just saying things about politicians very generally. And look, he understands. And my point I kept coming back to again and again is, no, he's talking about a very specific kind of threat, right? He's talking about a very specific kind of thing. It's hard to do. And we are in a moment where everything, and it's not new to our moment, when people are throwing around words in all kinds of ways without any meaning, again, relying on the emotional impact to these as words or threats or whatever. I don't know the easy answer, except to say that politics always engages emotions. That's not new, nor is being a demagogue new. But if you're deploying emotions in a really obviously manipulative way, and if you are doing so without any real concrete policies or any discussion of realities, and you're really just kind of drumming people up for yourself and the sake of your reputation and your power, that's a good clue, right? You're right. You can't draw straight lines and you can't divide into sort of black and white differences. Politics involves emotion, but demagogues are more than just using emotion. Demagogues are doing it for a very specific purpose that has more to do with them than it does have to do with the body of the people at large.
Yeah. All right. Well, we are over our time, even though there's a couple of good questions left. So maybe we can squeeze some of those in the after party. Do you want to explain to everybody, Joanne, what's
going to happen next? Indeed. So we are a couple minutes over, but these were all really good questions. We are now going to head into the after party. What that means is that we will no longer be recording what we're doing so that we can speak even more freely than we have here. If you beamed in to the NCHE link, stay right where you are, and poof, someone just got bingo. You will be in the after party. If you are watching us from Facebook, you need to leave Facebook and go to ncheteach.org/conversations, ncheteach.org/conversations, and then you too will be in the after party. I wish you all a wonderful week ahead. As ever, I thank you for engaging in the conversation of democracy on a Friday morning. And today's topic is a really important one, particularly given what some folks watched on TV this week. Really important to think about the realities and definitions of what we're watching, and not just getting swept up into the experience of it all. Thank you for being part of that discussion. We will be here again as a community for next Friday. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors, join us. I have no idea what we're going to talk about, but I'll know by then. And thank you to Annie, and thank you as ever to John for being here and being part of this and making it possible. And I will, for those of you who aren't going to stick around for the after party, I will see you folks next week. Little applause. I like the little hands.